Dredge is a deck named after its best mechanic. The goal of the deck is to use those dredgers to mill their library into their graveyard and then win with creatures rising from the dead. The deck has explosive starts and even utilizes late game reach. It's a deck that's gone through many changes throughout Modern's history, from bannings to new printings. However, if you look at Dredge today, it's a deck that almost has both feet in the grave. So, what happened? Why did the premier graveyard deck of the format just stop working? Why does no one play Dredge?
Well, no, if he gets the loan back, he loans back Bloodghast. He has it on board.
There's a Creeping Chill.
That makes it easy.
Yes, it does. And that's going to do it. Ian Thorne's going to win this game of Match over Andrew Kurtzman. 2-1.
Snapcaster Mage, Chump Block, Path to Exile, your Narcomoeba.
You do what you have to do.
Exactly what I was thinking.
There's your block. Down to 2. Here's your Conflict Rate. See you later. Oliver Tomiko is going to win this game and match here over Drake Sasser.
This video topic was suggested by one of our viewers in the comments section, so feel free to comment if you have an idea for a video, and be sure to subscribe down below to keep up to date with new videos coming out. Let's start with some talk of Dredge's history in Modern. Dredge is a really weird deck. It's had a lot of ups and downs over the years of its history. But Dredge's history in Modern actually begins in Extended. Back then, the deck was a Dread Return deck. Utilizing cheap creatures and Bridge from Below, the deck would use dredgers to toss its library away quickly. Afterwards, it would flash back Dread Return to bring back threats like Iona, Shield of Emeria, Flamekin Zealot, or Sphinx of Lost Truths if it needed extension. When Modern came to be, unfortunately, Dread Return and Golgari Grave Troll were on the original preliminary ban list. So, the deck had to adapt with a different angle. Dredgevine was a graveyard deck utilizing Vengevine, which reanimated itself if you cast 2 creatures that turn. Despite its name, these kind of decks didn't really have much to do with Dredge itself. Sure, it had self-mill, and the main strategy was bringing back creatures from the graveyard, but the deck rarely ran any main deck Dredge cards. Then, in 2016, Shadows over Innistrad released, and Dredge gained 2 new tools: Prized Amalgam and Insolent Neonate. Combined with the unbanning of Golgari Grave Troll in 2015, Dredge now had the tools it needed to set up and quickly pressure the board. And then, at the end of 2016, Dredge gained Cathartic Reunion, the best setup spell Dredge would ever receive. Utilizing old cards like Narcomoeba and Bloodghast, being able to churn out multiple 3/3s from the graveyard for free proved to be too much. And on January 9th, 2017, Golgari Grave Troll was rebanned in Modern to bring the deck back in line. For about the next year, Dredge just kinda did its thing. It was still a legitimate deck, sure, but it wasn't a tier 1 need-to-beat threat like it used to be. Then, in 2018, Dredge got a sizable bone thrown its way: Creeping Chill. With Creeping Chill, Dredge now had 12 free damage floating around in its deck, and anyone playing against it had to respect that. Not only was it a way to make their opponents start at 8 life, it also padded Dredge's life total, buying it time against matchups like Burn. But another downswing was to come. In 2019, Modern Horizons 1 released, and with Modern Horizons came Hogak. And with Hogak, the presence and dominance of graveyard decks was proven to be too much for the format. On August 26, 2019, Faithless Looting was banned in Modern. And while Dredge has gotten a couple of new tools over the years, like Silver Smoke Ghoul and Ox of Agonis, the deck has struggled ever since. So now that we've seen the history of Dredge, let's take a look at a Dredge list today and where Dredge has ended up. We'll start with the most important cards, the Dredgers. If a card with Dredge is in your graveyard, you can mill a number of cards from your library and return the card to your hand instead of drawing a card. Utilizing cards like Dark Blast for Dredge 3, Golgari Thug for Dredge 4, and Stinkweed Imp for Dredge 5, this turns your draw step into a repeatable way to fill your graveyard. The best setup for this is Cathartic Reunion. Since discarding 2 cards is for cost, you can discard Dredgers in your hand and then turn each of the 3 draws into a Dredge, quickly dump trucking your deck. Other setup cards include Otherworldly Gaze, a way to mill the right cards into your graveyard at instant speed, and Tome Scour, a clean and simple mill 5. For payoffs, we have Narcomoeba, which reanimates itself when milled, Prized Amalgam, which reanimates itself tapped when a creature comes back from the graveyard, and Oxyvagotus, which is a 2-mana 5/3 from your graveyard that discards your entire hand and draws 3. Pretty insane for this style of deck. And finally, we have 2 payoffs that go together. As mentioned earlier, Creeping Chill drains your opponent for 3 if it's milled, and Silver Smoke Ghoul is Prized Amalgam but for gaining 3 life. And it can sack itself to draw, which does come up. While this isn't ubiquitous in all lists, Wonder gives the deck's beaters a way to soar over a gummed up board. Finally, Conflagrate gives the deck a flashbackable way to get the last few points of damage on an opponent, or removes a key creature or planeswalker. In the lands, I want to draw attention to the newest addition, Cephalid Coliseum. Printed into Modern with Modern Horizons 3, this land gives Dredge a very powerful extension tool after 1 or 2 dredges. Alright, so this deck is incredibly explosive and effectively uses its graveyard as a second library. This is a really strong angle for a deck to have. So, what's happened in Modern for Dredge to lose its luster? Alright, let's just get the elephant out of the room right away. The loss of Faithless Looting impacted a ton of graveyard decks, Dredge included. Without the card selection, and for this type of deck, card advantage of Faithless Looting, the deck was forced to find replacements. Insolent Neonate was still an option, but that was run before, so it didn't really plug the hole. Tormenting Voice was tried, but it was quite literally a worse cathartic reunion. Merchant of the Veil was mostly settled on as the closest thing to a replacement for a time, being able to discard and draw 1 at instant speed, and it could even use the creature side for repeatable discard draw later in the game. And now, none of these are run, with Otherworldly Gaze and Tome Scour taking Faithless Looting's place. But these 2 cards are just not the same, with no way to draw off of either of them. Plus, Faithless Looting's flashback made it impactful even when being milled over, something Tome Scour does not have. Without looting, Dredge has gone from a deck with a relatively consistent setup and a gambly payoff to a deck with a gambly setup and gambly payoff. It really needs to keep a hand with Cathartic Reunion for a truly explosive start, and even with that, Otherworldly Gaze, Tome Scour, and Cephalid Coliseum have just made the deck a little too slow compared to the rest of the Modern metagame. Cephalid Coliseum doesn't even do anything until you've dredged once, best case scenario. Faithless Looting could set up, pay off, and do it all again from the grave. But even with this slowdown, Dredge has always been a powerful Game 1 deck. After a Game 1 win, Games 2 and 3 would be decided by a battle of the sideboards. And due to where the current Modern meta is, this could actually be an advantage for Dredge. In previous years in Modern, main deck graveyard hate was something you only really saw if the format was truly degenerate, and because of this, graveyard decks like Dredge could go through Game 1 relatively unimpeded. Then in Game 2, they'd expect their opponents to bring in their hate. So because of that, Dredge would bring in its answers to the hate and play a slower game plan. Over time, however, this is a battle that can shift from the sideboard to the main deck. We aren't seeing it much right now due to the current state of the Modern metagame, but like Bogles, Dredge is one of those decks that can lose to free-rolled hate pieces. When Rakdos Scam was still unbanned, Grief and Thoughtseize were able to rip Cathartic Reunion out of hands, and Dothy Voidwalker was not only a main decked hate piece, it also swung for 3 each turn. Any Urza Saga deck can utilize the plethora of 1 and 0 mana colorless artifacts that are Graveyard Disruption. Bogart Trawler is utilized in Yawgmoth and could realistically be put in any black deck for graveyard hate. Dimir Frog is sometimes running a copy or 2 of Surgical Extraction main deck for certain matchups and could easily run more if Dredge became an issue. Honestly, the main reason we aren't seeing that much graveyard hate in Modern right now is because decks like Living End and Reanimator can be dealt with by other cards that work well against other decks in the meta, not just graveyard decks. So this is a great time to lead into some major news for the archetype. while I was working on this script, Dredge won a modern challenge. And this is great to hear. The best thing that can happen to one of these videos is that it ages poorly. That list that I showed at the beginning as an example Dredge list, it was piloted by user Bertram to an 8-1 first place finish in that challenge. And Dredge has been putting up 5-0 finishes in modern leagues throughout this week. So honestly, this might be the best moment to play Dredge in recent times. So maybe that's Dredge's angle in the meta. It can expose the lack of hard graveyard hate currently in decks. But let's say that this goes just a step farther and Dredge becomes a tiered deck once again. To give an example and some ideas of what might happen, I'm gonna list off some cards that multiple decks in Modern would slot in without losing much sleep to combat Dredge. Dothy Voidwalker, Bogart Trawler, Ghost Vacuum, Unlicensed Hearse, Surgical Extraction, Cling to Dust, Endurance, Soulless Jailer, Agatha's Soul Cauldron, Tormod's Crypt, Nile Spellbomb, Relic of Progenitus, Soul Guide Lantern, Consigned to Memory, Thraben Charm, Scavenging Ooze, Bajuka Bog, Grafdigger's Cage, Leyline of the Void, Extirpate, Rest in Peace, Lion Sash, Scrabbling Claws, Scavenger Grounds, Kozilek's Command, Remorseful Cleric, Stone of Eric, Turn the Earth, Sanctifier Envec. Also, consider how many of these can be searched up with Urza's Saga. Right now, Dredge may be trying and to an extent succeeding to prey on the lack of graveyard hate, but if it ever became tiered, the top decks would adjust, run more main deck and side deck graveyard hate, and quickly re-bury Dredge back into the ground. Dredge is a deck that once struck Game 1 fear into the hearts of modern players. After Game 1, they would go into their sideboard, expect hate pieces, get rid of those hate pieces, and then go all in on one turn to seal either Game 2 or Game 3. You gotta make your opponent have it, and sometimes they don't, or sometimes you just have the answer. The banning of Faithless Looting took the bite out of it. The printing of better and better graveyard hate took the resilience out of it. Maybe Wizards will print something in the future that really drives Dredge back to the top. Maybe they'll print a payoff from the graveyard that's strong enough to make Dredge good again, but not so strong like Hogak that it just gets banned. This is a story that might actually get a happy ending, as Dredge is seeing the beginnings of a potential resurgence by exposing a weakness in the modern metagame. But my fear is, if it tries to rise too far to the top, it'll be thrown into a cement coffin, entombed under the meta once again.